Unsiloed podcast is produced by University FM, elevating the stories of your institution.
Welcome to Unsiloed. This is Greg LeBlanc, and I'm here today with Bill Conaty, who is, I guess, former big man in HR at GE, right? Also at Clayton, Dubilier and Rice, and also the author of this book called The Talent Masters: Why Smart Leaders Put People Before Numbers. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know, I was chatting with a colleague of mine, Peter Goodson, who we both know, and I said to him, you know, what do you think I should do? I asked him, who do you think I should have on my podcast? Do you know anybody? And of course, he immediately referenced you. He said, this guy, Bill Conaty, you've got to talk to him. And of course, the more I have learned about what you've done, the more I realized that was actually a really good recommendation, because this topic of HR and, the book Talent Masters, you could say it's about HR, but the problem is that I think a lot of us have a misconception about what HR is. And you argue that most companies, their success or failure is built on their ability to acquire, attract, retain, and develop talent. And so this is something which should be the key fundamental priority of senior leadership. And when you look at the data, it seems like CEOs spend 40% of their time thinking about people. But I remember when I proposed an HR course to the senior leadership at my business school, they said, HR, like, nobody cares about HR. Well, HR, right? Because I think everybody has this conception, not just in the general public, but also even within academia, that, HR is just this sort of box checking functionality, right? I mean, maybe they've been watching The Office and they see
my man, Toby,
the HR guy.
Toby.
So I guess, maybe we could start off by saying, why is it that people have underestimated the importance of talent when it comes to business success? And why do they focus on, strategy and other sorts of things, which of course I teach strategy as well.
Sure. No, I think you've got it exactly right. I mean, I think the function has an issue with their relevance in a lot of minds of CEOs. The ones that recognize HR as a legitimate business partner versus just a functional expertise that does the hiring and the benefits. And as Welch used to say, when he wanted to make a demeaning comment about HR, he'd call it the health and happiness group, or one beyond that was the picnics and benefits crowd. So which in a lot of organizations, kind of rings true. But in his case, at least in my situation with Jack and GE, when he elevated me to the top job in the company in '93, he was looking for a business partner. And he said to me, look, the biggest job we're going to have over the next, so he was around for another 8 years. He said, the toughest job we're going to have is finding my successor. And so, we had a lot of time in between, but we focused on that, almost constantly. And most HR folks at the time were always complaining about not being able to get a seat at the table, so to speak. My issue was getting away from the table. I was in on every strategy meeting, every operational review, every financial review, every people development review. And so, when the rest of the organization sees that and feels it, and you're making an impact, you become one of the impact players on the CEO staff. And so, I had to push away from the table from time to time to get over to the HR crowd. But the nice part was being intimately involved with the CEO and the senior team. Whenever we had an initiative, I didn't have to go back 3 or 4 times and try to convince the CEO and the CEO staff where we were going next. We'd already made that call. So we weren't wasting a lot of time when I got back to the HR organization to say, let's charge. And we're all going right on this particular issue. So I think, it's been kind of a perception issue, and it's, and the function has evolved over the decades. I mean, if you go back to, and I was around for most of it, but if you go back to the, 60s and 70s and almost up into the 80s, kind of labor was kind of the central ingredient of top HR leaders with massive unions and the big corporations and the like. And then, then it kind of moved in the late 80s, early 90s, more toward talent, more toward business partnership. And then, then things have happened since. COVID then became the main event for HR people. You guys take care of the COVID stuff with our employees, and not still involved in the main act that was going on in the corporation. And so I think there's been a lot of kind of deviations over the years. I think we've got some great people in the function, and I think the whole DEI movement was another, whether you want to call it necessary, unnecessary, but another distraction, and it kind of has dominated a lot of the HR agendas over the last, say, 5 to 7 years. So I think I think there's no matter how good of an HR leader you are, if the CEO doesn't have high expectations for what he wants out of that function, you're in for a long day. So, I was fortunate to have a guy like Jack Welch. I was fortunate to have a guy like Jeff Immel, who were two totally different cats. But when it came to the HR agenda, they both had their foot all the way down on the accelerator.
Well, I think you also highlight that it's impossible to figure out who you want in your company if you don't really understand what your company does, right? And you can't really evaluate the people in your company unless you know what they do. So it seems like, HR is tied at the hip with operations, right? And perhaps with finance and all these other units. And yet we tend to divvy these things up. And a lot of times the HR people have no clue like what goes on in the company. I remember when I tried to get my HR course in the curriculum, I actually didn't do it as a organizational behavior course, but as an operations and economics class. So, I mean, that sounds like a lot. I mean, that sounds like a lot of work. It sounds like a very difficult job to be in HR.
But I think you're on a great point, though. I think that, one of the things that attracted a guy like Welch to me was I wasn't just a traditional HR guy, that I had spent 5 years in operations. Now, out of the 40, 35 were in HR and 5 were in ops. But I got huge credit for those 5 years in ops, which it differentiated me from the pack, so to speak. And so, my ability to relate to the financial folks, to the marketing folks, especially the operational folks, because most of my operational time was in manufacturing. So I think it's a big deal. And one of the things that, one of the interesting things that we did at GE back early on, when Jack still had, I guess I was okay, but HR still was was not on his hit list. And I said to him, look, what do I need to do to enhance your personal feeling of HR? And yeah, I mean, we can have a great relationship, but I can't have you, feeling lousy about the function. And I said, what do you think is the best training program in the company? And he said, the financial management program and the corporate audit staff, which was kind of the best of the financial management program went on the corporate audit staff. So we had at the time a HR, we called it the HR leadership program. So this was a 2 to 3 year program with some very sharp folks that came out of, some of the B schools, and mainly the ILR schools, Cornell and Michigan and Indiana and the like. And I said, what if, and so they'd have maybe 5 or 6 assignments over the period of, say, 2 to 3 years. I said, what if the folks that I bring on the Human Resource Leadership Program, the training program, what if I make one of their assignments on the corporate audit staff? And he said, holy shit, if you can do that, you will have rung the bell. So the woman that was running the corporate audit staff at the time and I had a chat, and she said, I'd love it. She said, because I got nothing but number wonks here, and anything that gets outside the black and white of the numbers, where somebody maybe with a broader view, with an HR perspective, could be very helpful to us. So we started that, and so for a number of years, most of the time I was on the job, if you came on that Human Resource Leadership Program, you were going on the corporate audit staff, or we even would allow them to go into, say, key manufacturing assignment or a marketing assignment, whatever. But initially focused hard on the audit staff because of the financial acumen and background, and so it actually attracted more people to the function. It attracted folks out of B schools and not just ILR schools to say, hey, this could be helpful to me somewhere along the way. Maybe I want to be a CEO, but this could be kind of an interesting route to get there. And we actually had 2 or 3 of the folks decide, I think I want to stay here. I don't want to come back. I don't want to come back into HR. I want to stay on a corporate audit staff. And I had a lot of my leaders squawking, saying, hey, this is no fair. I said, give it a break. This is the ultimate compliment. This is the best thing that could happen to us, that our people can not only compete on the corporate audit staff, they can excel. And then some of those folks, actually 2 of the 3 ended up 5 years later coming back into HR. So I think there's that connection with finance, with operations, and that the average HR individual just doesn't have.
Well, look, you paint a picture of GE that it's fascinating, but it also seems somewhat, I don't know, antiquated, right? You talk about a company that they have deep, intimate knowledge of almost all of their senior employees, right? You talk about how the CEO probably knows the names and a lot about the top 1,500 people, right? I mean, there's all sorts of data collection. You talk about these meetings that happen on a regular basis, the session Cs, where they're always talking about the people. I mean, and you're also cultivating and developing these people over long career paths. I mean, this seems like a different era, where people would go and work for these companies for basically their entire lifetimes. I mean, I talked to Jeff Immelt, and he talked about how, he had the meatball tattooed on him. Who does that anymore? You go work for Facebook for 2 years, and then you go work for Google for 2 years, and then you do a startup. I mean, is this kind of world even possible anymore?
No. Some of the elements, yes. But to your point, it's so rare to find anybody that spent, more than 10 years with a particular company. So I think some of those initiatives and systems and processes that we had in place, only work when you've got a true, what we thought was a meritocracy, or as close to it as you could get. And we were winning in the marketplace. And so, people did not want to voluntarily leave a company like GE. But those kind of companies, there's damn few of them out there these days. And to your point, people want to move around a little bit, and it's skills get rusty in a lot of these companies in a hurry. So it's certainly a lot more of what you can do as an individual than what the company's gonna do for you long term. And yet I hate to discount the fact that was something that really worked extremely well for a long time. But I also don't discount the fact that no matter who you are and what company you're in and how long you're going to be there, I feel that every employee needs to know where they stand in the organization at any point in time. And, whether that's a year in, 2 years in, whatever. And I think a lot of companies just say, hey, that's, who cares? I mean, it's, we'll hire somebody else. We'll get a new team in. So I think it's a lot more on the individual to take care of themselves than certainly it was, in our regime, so to speak.
Well, I mean, you talk about this skill of talent mastery, and the title's a little bit confusing because sometimes you're referring to individuals who have this capacity to identify and nourish talent. And then sometimes you're talking about companies, right, that have the ability to identify and nourish talent. And of course, there's a big debate about whether leadership and the skills that you're looking for are basically born or made. Like, are leaders born or are they made? And, it seemed when you talk about what these talent masters do, you say that they spend a lot of time observing and listening, which of course takes time. So, I mean, does the increase in turnover mean that we have to essentially identify these capacities much more quickly because we don't really have time to observe and learn? Is that sort of the...
Yeah, no, I think that's a great observation. I think especially now, if the average person's working someplace 3 to 5 years, you need to try to get as good a beat as you can, as fast as you can, as to whether or not this is going to work for you as a company and the individual. So I think there's a sense of urgency around that, and yet it can be pretty tough to do if you really don't have any kind of a system. Forget session C for a minute, but I mean that was intense. But everybody has to customize, I think, their own version of a talent development program, and it can be very, very different than GE. I mean, I always just tell people, hey, don't try to copy GE. Use some of the key ingredients if you can, but customize it to your company. I mean, we had numerous companies at the time, and in the Welch era, that would come in, and big companies, and want to clone what we were doing. And when we were into things like ABC, which I hated, but designating people in different categories.
Are you talking about the stack ranking system?
Yeah. I mean, the stack ranking system to me was okay as long as you didn't get totally stupid on the numbers. That 10%, 15, 20, whatever it was. We got fairly comfortable after we screwed up a couple of times with basically a top 30% and a middle 60, let's say, but there's both ends of that 60, and a bottom 10 was probably okay, but I always used it as a kind of a framework, not a cut line, and I always just say don't don't do dumb things to good people. But it did help. I mean, it helped in things to me like determining who gets what when it comes to bonuses, who gets what when it comes to stock options, maybe restricted stock, whatever. Am I taking care of the folks I like the best, or the ones that are really doing the job? And those kind of sharp looks every now and then, no matter how big or small your company is, I think it's pretty good. And I've always said that the best kind of recognition ever is just saying, Greg, I just want you to know, I think you're doing a hell of a job. Because we were always going in through restructuring, and Chris, some of your top people would leave because they thought they were next on the list. And you'd say, where the hell are you going? Well, you're laying off 20% of the workforce here, and nobody's ever told me anything. And you say, for God's sakes, you're one of our best. So
yeah, it's free. I mean, positive feedback is free, right?
Yeah, and that's the free one. That's the free one. It's nice when it comes with a check, but just the recognition of, I want you on my team. You're nailing it. And maybe we're in a situation right here where, bonuses are few and far between, but let me tell you, when the sun comes out, you're going to be on the top of my list. So, it's things like that I think, help people, whether it's a big organization or a small organization. I think it's probably tougher in a small organization, but it shouldn't be.
Look, a lot of the critics of that, rank and yank system that GE used, which Microsoft later adopted, I mean, they say that this kind of creates an adversarial culture within the organization where the people are fighting with each other instead of fighting against their competitor, and working together. I mean, how can you have a system of evaluation that doesn't do that unless you incorporate, cooperation as part of the metrics of ranking?
The way it worked for us, Greg, is it started from day one. I mean, I started in the company, eons ago in the late 60s. And I was on the manufacturing training program. And it was a 3-year program with six-month rotational assignments. And I was graded, I knew it going in. I mean, I was graded 1 to 5 each, halfway through the 6 months. And I knew goddamn well if I was a 3 or under, I probably wasn't going to be around long. So, and you probably know Steve Kerr, right? From Steve was great. He ran Crotonville while I was there. Steve worked for me, and after that was post Noel Tissue, and Steve was a big statistician, and he's saying. He says the reason why that works when you first start is because 70% of the people think they're in the top 10%. So you say, hey, this isn't going to bother me any. So point being that the way we were successful with it, or the way we got away with it, is that it started from day one. So it was institutionalized in the GE world. To your point, we had numerous companies come in and spend time with Jack and I. One was Ford Motor Company, and they came in and wanted to learn all about how we did the rankings and how we did retention and assessments and the like. And they went off and said, well, if GE can do this, we can do this at Ford. Well, they tried it. They airlifted what we did, and we told them don't. Airlifted what we did into Ford Motor Company, got a massive class action suit from anybody over 40 years old in Ford Motor Company. The CEO lost his job and the HR leader lost his job. So, I I've often used that as an example of, you just can't take what somebody else is doing and has been doing forever and then take it over and say, because we were getting most admired company, most every kind of accolade you could possibly get. So people wanted to know what was going on in there. But I would always put the caution flag out. Do it that fits your company, your culture, your values. Don't try to airdrop what we're doing, because we've been doing this a long time.
Well, I think that goes to the point that you made in the book, that the software of talent mastery has to come before the structure and process of talent management, right? And so, if you just airlift the structure and process, and you don't have this software, but what exactly is this software? I mean, I think what you're making the point that being able to evaluate talent is something that goes beyond metrics, right? Now, look, I used to teach this course on HR analytics, and the idea was like we should be able to find sophisticated metrics. I mean, obviously there's simple metrics. So if you just say, oh, like here's a number, boom, make the number, then that papers over all sorts of other stuff, right? And it confuses skill with luck, and you could be kicking problems down the road and so forth. So you need to have some complexity to the evaluation. But what exactly is it about the kind of soft skills of talent management? Why can't we just use metrics?
Yeah. Well, I think you got to use both. I mean, I think you got to use both. I mean, we wouldn't say, well, when we came up with initially, we talked about leadership. What do we look for in leaders? We started out with 3 E's: energy, energize, and edge. And so, that's a green light, red light, yellow light. We go out to all the businesses. And we came away from one, and the leader had dynamite energy, could energize others, more than enough edge, and his numbers sucked. So I said to Jack, we assume this, but we need a 4th E, and that's called execution. And so we formed the 4 E's. But point I think of, everything kind of flowed together in our place. I couldn't do away, Greg, with session C as the HR leader if I tried, because every one of our operational CEOs was totally dedicated and eyeball deep into the session C process, because the new Welch was at his level down through them, and it was up to them to take it down to the rest of the organization. So it was a pretty rare play, but I think it all came together just because of the sequence of, the operational reviews, the session C reviews, the financial, the op reviews, the research and development reviews. Every damn one of those was an HR review. Every one of them. I don't think we ever had a financial review where we said, look, we don't care what's going on here with the leadership team. We just want to see the numbers. It would always start with, if the numbers were off, hey, what's going on here? Do we have the right leaders in place? So you're going in for an op financial review, and all of a sudden you're immediately in an HR talent review. And so that just became kind of the way we all worked, the way we all looked at it. We didn't look at it as something that was a deviation or whatever. We knew that, if things were good, you might get away with that knee-deep turn from the start, but it was just inherent, everything we did. So, again, that's old school, that's old days. there's probably some kinds of versions of that can be worked in. Some of these companies are still pretty good size. I mean, they're most of them right now are trying to get people to come back to work is their biggest issue, and that's probably where the HR agenda is these days.
Well, look, there's a distinction between talent identification and talent development, and I think one of the folks in the book, the head of Hindustani Unilever, said something to the effect that leaders are born, not made, and the job of the senior leadership is to figure out who they are. And so a lot of the assignments and roles are primarily ones, especially early in the career, they're tests, they're ways to figure out whether people have this or not. But then the alternative view is that these leaders have to be developed. And that's one of the reasons why GE has spent so much money on Crotonville, right? On this education. So, I mean, how do we know the difference? Right? How do you know leadership potential, and then how do you know the tools that can potentially develop it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we always had our eyes out on people that we thought were special, but that would mean you'd get a trip to Crotonville. And so, we did spend an inordinate amount of money on Crotonville. Personally, I couldn't imagine GE's success without Crotonville at the time, because it was the ticket that if people thought, back to the point of, hey, you're doing a great job, if people thought they were going to the next course at Crotonville, I used to say we could skip a raise that year. Not that we did, but people wanted to know they were on that track. So I as far as leaders born and developed, there's probably a good share of both. But for the most part in GE, we were, I'd say, developing talent. And developing talent in, maybe you could say, a silo of what we liked at GE and what we thought would work. And there was never any excuse for not being able to deliver results. So, that was the metric part of it. And talent-wise, we had lots of ways to expose people, and fortunately had a lot of disparate businesses. So, if you ran a $5 billion business well at GE, like transportation, maybe you'd get a 10 or a 15 billion the next trip out. And so the nice thing is we had opportunities. We had opportunities for people to grow and develop and not leave the mothership. And, we had our fallout, but one of my metrics was retaining over 95% of our top talent, of our top, say, 500 people every year. And, of course, we had two categories. One was our initiative, and the other was their initiative. And of course, you could skew that a little, but the fact of the matter is, when somebody left for a great opportunity, terrific. We didn't feel bad about that. But we retained more than we lost. And then, as fate would have it, a lot of these folks, once they left the mothership, they found out that, there aren't those kind of talent development and session Cs and, constant op reviews. So, they kind of come in as a foreign body. Some it worked for, some it didn't.
Well, look, I think GE is built on the notion that there is such a thing as a good general manager. You can take someone, or general leader. You can take somebody from plastics and throw them into industrial equipment and then move them over to, medical supplies and appliances. I think there's been a trend recently towards the notion that you need to be deeply immersed in the domain, right? So, if you're going to be leading one of these generative AI companies, we can't just hire a CEO from Rubbermaid and like slap him in there, right? And but then it does seem like the whole private equity model, and you've spent the last 20 years in that world, that seems to be built on the old notion that management is a skill which is transferable across domains. So the private equity is almost like the rebirth of the conglomerate, right?
Yeah, really, truly. And it's interesting you say, we, to your point, I think Jack used to think that anybody that graduated from the corporate audit staff and moved up the line could run most anything. And until we faced our ultrasound business in the healthcare world, we kept putting GE hotshot leader after GE hotshot leader. And that was one that needed deep domain expertise. So we were either going to get the hell out of ultrasound or find someone who was a zealot. And we found Omar Ishraq from, he was in a company on the West Coast called Diasonics at the time. We brought him in, and everybody that comes in at that angle, it's usually the question is, what do I have to do to get in line to replace Jack Welch? All Omar wanted to know is, how serious are you about becoming number one in ultrasound? If you're serious, I can help you get there. And I thought, man, this is refreshing. He did, and we took great care of him. And then Omar goes on to run Medtronics very successfully. So, but I mean, there are cases where, especially as the technology gets more advanced, that you just can't have a general manager step in and take it to where you want to go.
Right. And then a lot of it has to do with firm-specific skills, right? So every company has a different culture. And if you learn to navigate one company's culture very well, I mean, a lot of those skills don't transfer. So, I mean, is that one of the secrets to retaining your employees, to have sort of a unique set of culture and unique set of processes that, are not transferable? Is that sort of the secret?
I think the answer to that is yes, only not to make them feel uncomfortable, but make them totally feel comfortable. And as they see, like when the when the boom came around where everybody was running off, and Webvan and these companies were starting up, a couple of our top people, young but top folks, went off to. We only lost a few, and it was, but a couple of them went to Webvan, and boy, all of a sudden, these were corporate audit staff. These were the whole deal, and people started, holy Christ, if he's leaving, this must be. And then of course it was, we all applauded when Webvan went over on its back, but it's, I think we probably, Greg, had more risk-adverse people, in our organization because we took great care of them if they were good. If they weren't, they were gone. And the ones that weren't top performers that left all got good jobs. They all traded off the GE resume, off the GE brand. And some did very well, and many were ones that we weren't looking to keep. So it was really kind of a unique situation for us, worked for us. As you said earlier, there's probably few and far between those kind of companies these days that can do that. And again, seeing an institution like Crotonville go by the boards is tough for us old timers.
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems like very few companies still have something like a Crotonville. some serious investment in leadership development. But I also noticed that there's been a trend where the reason why you would develop a leader at a place like GE is because you expected to reap the benefits of the skills that you gave to those employees. And nowadays, to the extent that the companies do leadership development, it's almost like they pitch the employees on the notion that, when you leave in 3 years, you will leave with, skill enhancement. So, it's sort of more of it's more of a way of attracting people, than it is anything else, to the extent that companies still do it.
Yeah. And to your point, I mean, it would be cost prohibitive for a company to start up something like Crotonville. I mean, sure, Apple could do it, and Apple
does. Apple does have Apple University.
And Apple has it. So, they would be the exception, and it works for them. But a lot of companies, though, what I've noticed is they'll set up some kind of a program with a local university and work something there, so that people do want higher education. I mean, they do want something that resembles personal development. What am I getting out of this? I'm giving everything I've got to this company, but I may not be here forever, but I'll be here longer if I feel like I'm progressing and that they're stepping up and doing some things for me on my own personal development.
So companies are relying much more on external sources of leadership training, and to some extent, they're even requiring that the individuals pay for it themselves. So, you pay for it because you're the one that's ultimately going to capitalize it. But I mean, are universities really in a good position? I mean, do universities have what it takes to provide this kind of training? I mean, in my experience, there is a bit of a mismatch between what the universities are offering and what the companies are looking for. And I don't know why that is. I mean, it could be lack of communication. One time I was, the dean of my business school sent me in his place to this meeting of all the business school deans and all of the CEOs of all the top investment banks. And, we were talking, and we had a view of what we thought our students should learn. They had a view of what their recruits ought to know. And it turned out that, our career management people thought something very differently, and their recruiting people thought something very differently. So their recruiting people and our career management people were on the same page. It's just that page was different from what the senior leadership was looking for. So, I mean, what do universities have to do to provide the kind of quality training that might have once taken place at a Crotonville?
Yeah, I think where it has some merit with the universities is when it's a group of business leaders or future leaders from a myriad of companies, so that the university end isn't going to provide maybe that much of an uplift. It helps to say I went to this course, but what people will look at is the network. Who did they meet while they were in this class, and how did they learn from other business people? And certainly, the profs can add a lot of value there too. But it's mainly the network of people that are there. And we used to send a couple people each year out of our aircraft engines business to the MIT Sloan Management School. And we'd send, in our Midwest businesses, we'd send them out to Stanford. And they'd go there for a couple of years, year and a half, I guess, whatever it might have been. And they'd be with their peer groups from all different companies around the world. And we'd forget they were gone. And then they'd come back and we'd say, oh shit, what are we going to do with him? They go back into the same job maybe that they were in before, where they were, looking for, a big lift, and they'd leave us. They'd rely on their network and they'd be gone. within a year. So I think, it's a matter of, I do think the universities can still play a role, and I think it's with groups that can learn from each other, and the additive piece of what's the latest and greatest in the business world from a university perspective. I mean, we went through that at Crotonville. When Crotonville first started, it was a total Crotonville faculty. It was full-time Crotonville faculty, and a few B school folks and the like. That didn't really work. And then when Jack started Workout in the 80s, he made it almost all B school. So that's when the Tishies and the Kerrs and the Ulrichs and the whole gang came in. Len Schlesinger, the whole gang. And so it became, they were disciples of what Welch wanted in Workout. Where we finally got it right was having what the folks inside the company really wanted was we ended up with about a 70% inside leadership instructors and 30% or so from the top B schools. So, I would be up at Crotonville at least once a month for 4 or 5 hours, and then have cocktails with the group and let the bullets fly. And it was that's when we got, I thought, the best blend of Crotonville. They wanted to see and hear from internal leaders, CFO, the CMO, and of course Welch and ML were always up there. So there's a place for both, and it's just a matter of finding the balance.
Well, look, how do you encourage people to spend time doing that? I mean, every day you're teaching at Crotonville means a day away from your main job. And, to the extent that you're getting performance evaluations, if I'm mentoring and I'm coaching and I'm advising and I'm spending all this time helping people who work for me to become better and better, yeah, sure. If I'm going to be there forever, and they're going to be there forever, I might be able to benefit from this. But if I'm going to be rotating out in 2 years, like, what incentive do I have to invest in these people when my performance is on the line?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was always an issue when we had, our courses. Some of these courses were initially like 6 weeks, and then we chopped it down to 4. And then eventually we chopped it down to 3 because, people, they were burning it on both ends. No vice president of a business is really all that happy about letting a couple of his key GMs or future top leaders off to Crotonville for a month. So, we tried to, back it down to the point where you're still getting what we want out of you. And it was quite honestly, I think part of it was the corporation's way of making sure that our leaders stay within the corporate umbrella versus going native in their business, thinking that, everything to do with my career and my future, it has to do with my leader in Cincinnati versus Jeff ML or Jack Welch or myself. So it was a kind of a checks and balances in a way. But yeah, it's an issue of saying, if I'm gonna be moving around every 2 or 3 years, I don't have a hell of a lot of time to spend 3 weeks or a couple of weeks in some course. But the ones that people seem to, and the resumes I see is I went to the Harvard, whatever the hell it is, the 2-week business executive business class or something. So, it's sure as hell no Harvard degree, but it makes people feel like I got something over on the guy that doesn't. So So, so some of those things still play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, of course, we as academics, I mean, we're always trying to figure out, at least some of us are always trying to figure out, how do we continue to stay relevant as instructors? And, if we spend too much time in the academic rabbit hole, then, we become useless, I think, to a lot of the corporates. But if we don't have that academic piece, then, there's no reason for them to come to us. Right. So we have trouble figuring out what the right balance is.
Yeah. Well, I should mention that on this whole HR issue of relevance and perception in that, Dave Ulrich has recently, he says, I'm going to give it one more try, has recently engaged a number of us to say, is it worth it? Should we do it? Dave is totally committed and dedicated to doing it. And because it's Dave, I'll lend a hand, but I don't have any massive expectations, Greg, that we're going to get back to where I think it should be. And that is more of HR. I've always said where I wanted HR folks to be and that worked with me and JE was I wanted them to be credible, visible, value-added business partners. And I don't see all those elements hanging out right now in the function. And
well, yeah, I mean, we don't see HR divisions or functions recruiting at business schools all that much. I mean, yeah, there's a big spike in recruiting for, DEI officers and stuff like that. But I mean, we don't see the HR folks coming and trying to recruit the top talent. Is that a problem?